Really pleased to be joined by Standard Chartered CEO Bill Winters. Thanks for coming along. How are you today?
Very, very well. Nice to be here.
Excellent. Welcome. You're very welcome here. Standard Chartered is an extraordinary bank, an extraordinary story, and in the context of India, pretty phenomenal. Largest branch presence of any international bank in India, with 100 branches. You've been there for 150 years. 21,000 employees. It's pretty extraordinary. In your words, how important is India to Standard Chartered?
No, India is Standard Chartered, and I'll say it's part of us. So our first branch was in Calcutta. Mm-hmm. It's a third of our global population. It's our bank in India is amongst the most important in our group. And of course, Indian leaders have permeated the rest of our organization, as Indian leaders have permeated many of our markets. So it's Standard Chartered and India kind of go together.
So, I have to say I am a fan of globalization, and I didn't love all the flack that it's taken. But, there was a famous book when I was in graduate school, The End of History, Francis Fukuyama. And at one point, it looked like in the last couple of years, like we might have seen the end of globalization. Now, your global chair, Jose Viñals, took a different aspect that I wonder if you want to build on. He said the real question we should be asking is how we ensure free trade, how we ensure globalization is recognized as the true force for good that it is.
Yeah, and that's absolutely clear. In fact, one of our core strategic objectives is to reset the debate on globalization, to reset the conclusions. I mean, globalization has lifted billions of people out of poverty. It continues to. Right? Trade is increasing, not decreasing. Our research and our survey suggests that trade will grow by 70% over the remainder of this decade, over the next 8 years, 70%. And it may be slightly different in profile, but globalization is, in fact, very much alive. And it's continuing to contribute to the alleviation of poverty. The key is that globalization in its, this post-social and now medical crisis makeover is fair. And that's, people were left behind in the last round of the 30 years of globalization leading up to this century. And the people that are left behind are very angry, and they make noise, and they change politics, and they set policies. And we can understand the frustrations. Trade can be both productive and contributive to growth, and also be fair. And that's, at Standard Chartered, we'd like to make our contribution to that debate, to find a way to get the benefits of trade without leaving so many people behind.
So what are the key components of that? How do you get the benefits of trade without leaving people behind? So
we know what's happening, especially following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that we have we call it onshoring or nearshoring or friendshoring. So there's going to be a recalibration of supply chains with security in mind. And that is a reversal of where we had been for years. But I think many corporations and governments became uncomfortable with the degree to which they were reliant on countries which could end up being either hostile or somewhat ambivalent about whatever your particular view is. So, and that will be anti-global. So there will be some reversal. We've already seen it. We'll continue to see that. But that's a pretty small proportion of, like, maybe an infinitesimal proportion of the overall trade that takes place. The things the steps that we need to take to make sure that trade is fair, that one, it's got to be sustainable. So that this idea of we have our sustainable buying policies in various countries, including in India, that's applied consistently. Second is that the people who are displaced by trade, that's contemplated, and that at the earliest possible stage, we are investing in them to reskill for a new economy. So we do that in obviously our own very small way at Standard Chartered, and we're displacing people, not so much through globalization, mostly through automation all the time.
Right.
And we invest in reskilling them. But we need to do that at a national level. And there are some great examples of where that can work. I think India has some outstanding programs. Singapore, it's at the core of their political existence, is continually reskilling people. So I think these are the steps that we can take to make globalization both an ongoing benefit to society, but also fair.
So I want to leak into some of the other pillars that I know are really important to you. So if we just look in particular about lifting participation, especially of women and girls, which we know when we focus on them, the benefits are multifold in whatever country you want to look at, in whatever place and time. And that is a part of resetting globalization, because when you increase trade and you increase openness and you empower women and girls to have a larger part within the economy, within society, the benefits multiply. So tell us a little bit about how you're doing that.
Yeah, we really have three overarching strategic, we call them stands. So these are long-term aspirations. Sustainability is one, resetting globalization is another, and lifting participation, as you say, is the third. And we're a local bank, right? So we operate in 30 countries, very much on the ground, including retail banking. Another 30 or 40 where we have a presence, mostly for corporate banking. But we're local, and we're local in the markets in which we operate. And the best way for us to promote our business locally is to have a thriving economy that's inclusive. The more people that can bring themselves to the productive economy, the better off society will be, and obviously by extension Standard Chartered. It's not a purely mercantilist approach. I mean, we also believe in doing the right thing by our communities. We think that pays off in the long run. But it starts with financial literacy and education. Our objective is to improve the lives of 1 billion people by including them in the financial system. It's education, it's access to financing, it's things like mentoring, it's things like teaching people how to operate in a collaborative way from a very early stage. And why do we focus disproportionately on girls, young women, because they're most excluded in many of our markets. We think that
Where do you think they're most excluded in your markets?
I think historical bias, and it's not just our markets, of course. I mean, you can hear from my accent, I'm from the US. I've lived in the UK for 30 years. And it was only 100 years ago that women got the right to vote. So, I mean, this is not a new thing. But some of our markets are lagging in that regard. And women have obviously biological responsibilities, or they take them on, that disadvantage them in some ways, and there are cultural biases.
I meant where. I said where are they most disadvantaged, do you think?
Where? I mean, everywhere. I can't think of a country that where women, where we can genuinely say, you may have a different view, but where women are exactly pari passu to men in everything that they do. But of course, in many of our markets, we have women who have done outstandingly well, but in most they're underrepresented in business. And it probably starts at an early age with education and access to financing. So. And access to not just education broadly, but financial literacy in particular. So we've got programs, and my favorite, if I'm allowed to have my favorite, is our Women in Tech program, where we've incubated now several hundred women-owned or controlled or targeted businesses, and the targeted businesses are almost always women-owned or controlled. And we give them mentoring. If they make it through the rounds, we give them financing. Eventually, they become our clients. But we're doing it in order to create.
How big are those businesses when you start working?
Zero. They're startups.
Okay.
They're startups. So I mean, usually there's an idea that maybe they put a little bit of venture type money in, which is usually coming from themselves or their family or friends. But an initial grant for a company that's getting started at the back end of this program might be $10,000. I mean, we're not. This is not a big commercial operation, but we've touched thousands of women, and those women then hire tens of thousands of women to work in their and men of course as well. But I think by creating a space for women to learn and live and grow, especially in the new economy, we think we can make a real difference. And we do, I think.
Really interesting. This idea of financial education, I think, is so important. I think it's something that's ignored by a lot of. We talked about a reskilling, reimagining education. It's one of the things that I think countries are falling behind in not encouraging, because when you learn about how to take care of your finances, you gain an incredible skill, and once you learn it, you have those skills for life. What have you learned that you think could be? You say you touched thousands of lives, helped thousands of women. How do you do that for millions or billions?
Yeah, well, and that is the objective, right? We really want to get to 1 billion people through this program, and with a disproportionate number being women. Obviously, well, not obviously, but it won't be all, because we're not gender specific in our programs. But I think it starts with a basic level of skills and competence, but then it is confidence. So, and we find frequently women and men who have not engaged with the formal financial system at all are very reluctant to walk into a bank. They're much more likely to go to their local moneylender, who's more likely to be usurious and expropriative. Statistically, that's very, very clearly true. Whereas the formal financial sector is much more inclusive. Not very inclusive, but more inclusive. So providing not just the skills, but also the confidence, the trust, building up relationships of trust, and not just at the very beginning, but as women evolve either through their careers or through the development of their business. And I don't want to emphasize too much the focus on women. That's our focus. But the focus for our lifting participation stand is small businesses.
Right.
And again, small businesses are the backbone of the economies in most of the markets where we operate. Clearly the case in India. The biggest employers, the biggest growth is coming from small businesses. And let's give them every possible chance to succeed and every possible chance to access the formal financial system.
It's interesting because a couple of panels ago, we had a bunch of folks who are working within running fintechs in India. And it does seem that a lot of them are working with micro businesses, with small businesses. Do you think it's easier to trust a fintech than it is to trust a bank like Standard Chartered?
Sometimes. We actually just, a year and a half ago, launched a fintech. We created it in Standard Chartered, but just yesterday we announced that we brought in a partner for 10%, which is a Japanese venture capital firm that is serving really the small SME community. And through our own experience as a bank and through our own research, we identified a number of really extraordinary pain points for these small businesses. And these might be single proprietorships or small phone distributors or small businesses. And we created this platform. It's called Solve, S-O-L-V, and based in Bangalore. And we've added, I think, 400,000, 450,000 customers in the first few months. And they're able to deal with each other. They're able to deal with their suppliers. They're able to access finance, professional services, legal services, accounting, et cetera, in a completely agnostic way. So like any marketplace, there's a system of peer reviews. And why don't those small businesses just go to the bank to get their loan? Because they've had bad experiences. One way or another, they've had bad experience. Or maybe they haven't had bad experiences, they're just afraid. But when they can see that their peers are giving 4-star ratings or 5-star ratings to this service from this provider, who maybe they would never have had a chance to come across, it does build confidence. And of course, especially younger people these days are very familiar with accessing platforms and relying on peer ratings. So this is phenomenally successful, this thing that we set up. We rolled it out in Kenya as well. We've not announced yet, but we have a partnership that we're about to roll out in Vietnam. I think this is the sort of thing that can really take off. Now, why does Standard Chartered build this thing? We own it, we run it, but we don't need to own it. Maybe we'll provide some services into it, but we'll be one of thousands of banks that are, or financial services providers. But we do understand the pain of our customers because we heard it from them directly. So is it trust? Probably not so much trust. It's more, I don't know where to go. I don't know where to go to get this help. And I've got this banker who's telling me, just come to me, I'll take care of you. And maybe that is a trust thing.
Right.
I'd rather go into the marketplace and have some of my peers help me to make the right choice.
Okay, so in resetting globalization, we need to be thinking differently about it. We need to be inclusive, and we need to be including women and girls in the process. The other idea that I want to focus on is around sustainability, because we know that there is a funding gap of, depending on how you count it, but about $4 trillion a year to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Now, even if you don't believe we're going to achieve them by 2030, even if you think that it's going to take a little bit longer, and you only cared about one, i.e. The climate goal, we have a massive issue around funding, and not only funding, but moving money from the richer parts of the world to the lower and middle income countries. That's been a focus within India Global Forum, not just today, but in Bengaluru and Dubai. We know that there's a new city, Gift City, which is helping international institutions to move money through there. But I want you to talk to me about what this means to you and how urgent you think the need is.
It means a tremendous amount to us, and it's extremely urgent. And even the idea that we're not going to hit our targets by 2030 is desperately concerning. So we operate across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And those markets already are the most affected by climate change. We're the biggest foreign bank and one of the biggest banks in Bangladesh. We know what Bangladesh has in store if we can't control the increases in temperatures. And we got a taste of what 50-degree heat consistently for 2 weeks can be this year in India. So these are not inconveniences. These are devastating things for human life and for the economy. So we, at an existential level, as a bank, need to get this right. Of course, we're just a tiny part of society, which also has to get this right. You're right, as I would expect, about the $4 trillion. per annum that's needed, of which about 3.5 is just in addressing climate change. And all the work that we've done, it makes it clear that probably 70 or 80% of the financing that's necessary in the developed world, you know where it's going to come from.
Yeah.
It's not in place, but you know, in sub-Saharan Africa, it's less than 10% of the funding that's needed to address this climate challenge is available. That's, I would say, is it our primary focus at Standard Chartered Bank? Yeah, it's definitely a top 3 thing that we are preoccupied with every day. How do we get this money?
How do you get the money? Because there's an issue around trust, there's an issue around regulation.
Yeah.
Financiers want to make sure that they know where their money is going, and sometimes there are opacities that it's hard to get through.
Yeah, there's enough money out there.
Yep.
So there's enough ESG, dedicated money. Even if you discount it for the amount that isn't really ESG money, but just says it is for marketing purposes, there's enough money. But that money has no idea how to invest in a project in Gambia, or even Dubai probably, and most of it. And we as bankers need to intermediate those flows. So to my mind, banks can take a chunk of the more complicated risk, but if it's a big proportion of 4 trillion, we don't have enough. We have to use the capital markets. Then there's a whole area of blended finance. So using the multilateral development banks, the export credit agencies, the World Bank, AIIB, et cetera. These are the organizations that can catalyze that 4 trillion to get into the hands of people that can make the most use of that money. And they're not doing the job so far. The MDBs are totally underweight in sustainable finance. Lots of talk, little action. Now I'm going to make somebody very angry. These are all our clients and our partners. We work very well with all these organizations, but it's not enough. Ultimately, the money comes from their shareholders. Their shareholders are governments. Governments are not doing enough to solve this problem. The private sector is ready to go. Going to need to be cajoled and pushed for sure, but we need to get there. A lot of the concern in the private sector is I'm going to do this good stuff and I'm still going to be criticized. I know that personally. We're doing lots of good stuff, and we get criticized because there's always.
Give me an example of when you've been criticized for doing something.
Well, at our annual general meeting this year, I had 100 people stand up with a mask of me with devil horns, calling me a greenwasher.
Crumbs. How did that feel?
It feels terrible, but it's completely. I kind of like it because they're bringing attention to a critical issue. I think we're past the attention phase, though. I think we're into the let's make this work phase, and I mean the fact is we've got very advanced and very publicly communicated transition plans. We've scoped out what it's going to cost. We've also scoped out how we're going to help our clients to achieve their own objectives. I mean, their objectives are our objectives. And we're doing the right thing, and we'll keep on doing the right thing. But we're going to do that in a fair and just way, because what we can't do is tell the people of Tanzania that they don't get to grow anymore. Yeah. That just doesn't work. For 2 reasons. One is it's not fair, and second is if we tell them they don't get to grow, they won't listen to us at all, and then we have no influence. So we're focusing on this just transition. We're focusing on getting all that money that's in well-intended hands into the hands of people that can make a difference, and we're trying to create the market mechanisms that can allow for that. So, one of the things that I spent, continuing to spend a lot of time on, but I was the chair of something called the Task Force for Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets, which we then transferred over to a formal governance body called the Integrity Council for the voluntary carbon markets. And my view, our view, we had 450 corporations, NGOs, academics, all private sector, focused on getting the money from people like Standard Chartered Bank or many of you in this room into the hands of people that are actually reducing carbon in the environment through the use of carbon credits, carbon offsets. Now, carbon offsets have a bad name.
They have a bad rap, but they're not all bad, are they?
No, they're mostly good. But the fact was, for the 30 years that I've been focusing on that market, there were no standards. So there were some projects that were just outstandingly impactful, and there were some projects that were greenwashing. And then there was a lot that was in between. And what we've done with the Integrity Council is to say, we're going to set the bar very high standard, kind of indisputably high. So if you engage in this project, if you put money into that project, you're going to have an impact on the amount of carbon in the environment. If we can get that right, that makes it so much easier for all this money to transfer from the wealthy to the needy in a way where we can be highly confident that we're having an impact. And where if you're a corporate, as a corporate CEO, I really want people to say, oh yeah, you spent $100 million of my shareholder money on that stuff. I believe that you've invested wisely. I believe that you've done what you said you were going to do. And right now, without the standards to evidence that, people don't say that. They say, yeah, you spent $100 million of my money for greenwashing. Now, not many say that, but 100 people with devil masks said that at our AGM this year.
It's interesting. And I wonder where, in terms of how optimistic or pessimistic you are, it sounds like you have been frustrated with some of the partners in terms of getting the money where it needs to go. I mean, I think I've been over the last 2 years to about 10 conferences where we've said that same statistic about the financing gap. It's not like people don't know it, and it's also not like people don't know that there's an opportunity there. Incredible opportunity to make money. Take, I don't know, sustainable aviation fuel is one. Yes, it's really expensive, but that's an incredible opportunity for some entrepreneur, right? Especially when you have a market that is ready to buy. So what is the problem?
I think it's happening. I mean, in my most recent visit to India, I met with several of the large project promoters for green hydrogen projects. They tell a very convincing story for how the investments to achieve scale can drive the cost of hydrogen down to roughly equivalent to the cost of fossil fuels. Now, obviously, the cost of fossil fuels has doubled, which makes it a slightly easier target to hit. But it's a massive investment, obviously backed by the government of India, or I should say supported by, because they're not paying for it per se. And this is very, very encouraging. This is government policy working to catalyze private investment to achieve the scale that can actually solve this problem. That we could actually solve the problem. Direct air capture, same thing. It's a proven technology. It works. It's just way too expensive. But you said the same thing 35 years ago, that the equivalent cost of solar power was 29 times the cost today. 29 times more expensive, right? The cost is reduced by 97%. We can do this. We just have to be determined right now. And this is why I get frustrated by even the idea that we can sort of kick this can down the road a couple of years. We need to make these investments today to have an impact in 2030. Not to solve it by 2030, just to have an impact. And along the way, we've got to protect the carbon sinks that we have today. The Amazon rainforest is a net emitter of carbon today. That's shocking, right?
That's frightening.
It's a net emitter of carbon. Why? Because there are more trees being burned down than there's carbon dioxide being absorbed by that massive amount of foliage. We will roast literally if we don't stop that. Can we encourage Jair Bolsonaro to be a little bit more eco-friendly? Yeah, be my guest. Can we pay the farmers not to burn down their rainforest? Yes, we can. And is that a bribe? I don't know. But it's a commercial transaction that gives that farmer who's trying to survive the ability to survive through the use of carbon credits. I mean, let's get on with it. Let's protect what we've got on the ground. Let's make the investments in what we need to get us out of this problem down the road. Let's do that with money that is sitting there waiting to be spent, that can be catalyzed by banks, by governments and MDBs. If we get that ecosystem right, we can crack this nut.
Really interesting. I wonder what role you believe the UK has to play in this. We've been discussing over the last day and a half reimagining the UK-India relationship, and the UK has, take any number of issues in the last couple of years, COVID, Brexit, hasn't always been a fan of globalization, back to the topic of this discussion, hasn't always engaged with it, but what role do you think for UK-India in terms of advancing some of the issues that you've been talking about?
I think it's an extremely powerful relationship for starters, highly complementary economies, huge flows back and forth already, and just looking at our little bank is an example of that. Extensive, our global operational center is in Chennai and with the satellite in Bangalore, and our headquarters is here. I mean, that flow itself is already substantial, and I think there's an opportunity to expand that broadly. But I think the UK's leadership around COP26 was extremely important, and I think the UK put many stakes in the ground.
I think it was a success then.
It's a process, right? I mean, there's a reason it's called COP26, because the first 25 didn't solve the problem, and in 27 and 28 are going to be a chance to take this forward again. But look, the UK has some brilliant, I would say, climate change and sustainability faculties, whether it's being a center for sustainable finance, I think a growing center for carbon markets, an innovation hub for some of the technologies that will be critical. India is one of the most innovative places on the planet, in addition to being one of the biggest markets with one of the biggest carbon problems and one of the biggest carbon opportunities. Right? So the complementarity between our two countries is phenomenal. And I think there's a determination to get this right.
Yeah, really interesting. I wonder if we could just touch on the international economic outlook. A little bit grim. Certainly the outlook from the World Economic Forum was, it's not just grim, it's grimmer. We have Federal Reserve raising rates, concerns about inflation. We've still got global food prices rising. I mean, it's a sort of tornado of crises in some ways. And a very optimistic outlook coming from India. But I wonder, as the CEO of a bank that looks around that entire part of the world, what views do you have?
Yeah, I think the outlook is grim. It's not very grim.
Okay.
Right? So, I mean, all those things that you mentioned, they're all right, and they're all correct. And inflation seems intractable for the time being. Central banks have indicated an intention to deal with that. They will raise interest rates to the point where economic growth contracts. It could contract into recession. There's two savings graces, probably more than two, but two big ones. One is that the economic momentum going into this crisis was pretty good during the post-COVID recovery. And second is that the financial system, banks and non-banks, is very strong.
Right.
And when the financial system is strong, normal economic cycles tend to be slightly buffered. When the financial system is weak, they get massively accelerated, as we saw in the financial crisis.
Yeah.
So those two things are good. But then I look at the two biggest population economies, two of the largest economies in the world, India and China, are both performing very well. Now, of course, China's going through its ructions right now on the back of their COVID lockdowns. But every indication is that China will come out the back end of this COVID period generating probably 5 to 6% growth. India is generating 6 to 8% growth. Right? These are big economies. The underlying demographics, I'll say for the time being, and I know China's got a real demographic problem, but the underlying demographics are very strong. And globalization is not going in reverse as it relates to those countries, right? China and India's trade balances are increasing, not decreasing. There's also a very healthy level of self-sustainability. So when you've got a couple of big engines in the world that are firing well, it can make up for some real softness, and it will be inflation-related softness or war-related softness in Europe and in the United States. So, yeah, are we going to have a recession? I'm afraid I think so. I know it's debatable, but I'm going to say yes. Is it going to be a severe or long recession? I suspect not.
Okay.
And I think a lot of it's priced into markets already.
Okay, so reasons to be optimistic.
I hope so.
Well, I'm glad we found a few. I'd like to give you an enormous thank you. Thank you very much, Bill Winters, CEO, Standard Chartered. Let's give him a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Stay with us. We are going to be back in just a few seconds. In fact, Mark is champing at the bit to join me up here on stage for our Reimagine series. We'll be testing some of your opinions there about the global economy's great pivot, and we'll be right back.